are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Jiggers' Place. I'm your host Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here in Jiggers' Place every other Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, so we can sit back, have a cocktail and a schmooze, as I like to say. See, I teach a little Yiddish, and as we head into the end of the week. So today, and for those of you who watch the show or have seen it before, so you know that one of the consistent themes is great books. And I've talked about 19th century literature. I talked about Stephen Crane's extraordinary book, The Red Badge of Courage, and I've talked about others. So this show, I'm going to be talking about what I would argue is the seminal book on how to write English well. And it's known as The Elements of Style. And it was written by a Cornell English professor named William Strunk. And I'm going to talk more about William Strunk when we sit down. But for now, I'm going to make a cocktail called the Strunk. So it's a riff on the Sidecar, which is a brandy-based cocktail, a classic cocktail, okay, or a variation if you don't like the word riff. So and it's comprised of brandy. In this case, I'm using Dupuis cognac. This is a VS cognac. VS means very special. It's the youngest of the cognacs. I believe it's VS is aged for about a year, if memory serves. But you have VS, you have VSOP, and then you have XO, not executive officer. For those of you who, like me, were in the Navy, XO means extraordinary or extraordinarily old. Okay, so it's got brandy, in this case cognac. By the way, like champagne can only come from the Champagne region in France. Cognac can only come from the Cognac region in France. That's why it's called cognac. There's another type of brandy called Armagnac, which, as you might guess, comes from Armagnac in France. Okay, and there are brandies made all over the world. When we say brandy, we typically mean brandy distilled from a grape-based liquor. But there are all kinds of fruit brandies, pear, peach, apricot, cherry. Kirschwasser is a very famous German cherry brandy. So all kinds of brandies. But when we say brandy just all by itself, usually we mean a grape-based brandy, and cognac is among the finest in the world. Okay, then we're going to add some orange liqueur. In this case, I'm using Cointreau, my favorite orange liqueur, especially since it's mentioned in the movie Casablanca. But again, there are lots and lots of different orange liqueurs, and triple sec, which if you're a margarita drinker, you may be familiar with triple sec. That's another type of orange liqueur, okay? And by the way, you can make fantastic margaritas with Cointreau. Okay, and then two other ingredients, some lemon juice. If you're on my email list, you get the recipe. It says fresh lemon juice. I'm not using fresh. I'm just using a very nice pre-made lemon juice, and then good old Angostura bitters. So we're going to start out, and we're going to put this in a cocktail shaker. I have my chilled cocktail glass, aka what most people call a martini glass. because that's what martinis are served in a cocktail glass, but it's actually known as a cocktail glass. And we're going to get 2 ounces of brandy. A little bit more. There we go. Okay. I've got ice in my shaker, as I'm sure you have already guessed. Let's see if we can get this cork back in here. There we go. Okay. And we're going to use a 1/2 ounce of Cointreau. Now, for those of you who like me keep kosher, you may say, wait, Cointreau? There's no certification on Cointreau. That's correct. But Cointreau made in France is kosher, even if it doesn't have a certification on it. And that's a nice thing. And so just make sure the Cointreau you're buying is sourced in France and you're good to go. So a 1/2 ounce of Cointreau and a 1/2 ounce of lemon juice. Okay. Go. And in the shaker. And just 1 dash of Angostura bitters. Okay. And now we are going to shake it. I always mention this, we're not shaking it just to mix the ingredients together, but also to let some of the ice melt, so the water and the various ingredients mix together and open up the flavors. You can see hopefully you can see the shaker is looking all frosty now. Okay, and of course, very skilled bartenders have all sorts of fancy ways they shake. If you've ever seen the movie Cocktail, you'll remember that with, can't think of the actor's name now. But anyway, famous for the Mission Impossible movies and the Top Gun movies, and he was also, like I said, in the movie Cocktail. Okay, that's pretty good. About 20 to 30 seconds should be enough. And let's see if I can, there we go. Get the cover off. And we'll pour this. Okay. And it's got kind of a golden flavor. Oops, I'm going to spill it, so take a sip here. Very refreshing. Okay, I'll see you on the sofa. It's my favorite day of the every other 2-week period to be with you and have a cocktail. This is quite delicious. What's not to like about cognac and a little Cointreau and lemon juice? Very refreshing. Okay, so as I mentioned in the opening, we're going to talk about the elements of style. So this is basically a facsimile of the original book, a recreation of it. And you can see it's small. Imagine if high school English were consisted, or even college English consisted of reading this book. We could have done it in, an hour, basically. It's not even 100 pages long. It's 52 pages long, right? And in many ways, this is what you need to know in order to write well. So let me tell you a little bit about
William Strunk. He was born in 1896, so in the 19th century. And he was, as I mentioned, he was an American, a professor of English at Cornell University, where he taught for more than 3 decades. So, that's it. These days we think of universities as places where a lot of research is done, and that is much more the case now than it used to be. But in the 19th, and I would say through perhaps the middle of the 20th century, universities were first and foremost places of teaching and learning. That's why they existed. While they were modeled on the German research university, the focus, there was far less of a focus on research then than there is now. So he and as a man of the Victorian era, Strunk really developed a passion for the English language, for communicating in English, and in particular for writing in English. And he really dedicated his life to helping his students master the art of communicating in the English language and writing effectively. And he believed that good writing should be concise, direct, and free from unnecessary ornamentation. And when I talk to you about some of the elements of style, you'll see that that's what they're all about. Okay, and I think one of the problems with English communication today is people tend to be verbose and yet not communicative. I struggle with that, and so I try to pick my words carefully. I try to be exacting in word selection so that the person with whom I'm communicating can be as clear as possible about what I'm attempting to say. So in 1918, Strunk privately published the original The Elements of Style. And as I showed you, it was just a concise handbook for his Cornell students. It wasn't anything that he intended, at least in the beginning, to have anything like the impact it has had since then. And it really, this book in 52 pages distilled his teaching and really attempted to make it as clear, concise, and simple as possible for students to write well. I mean, it's a tremendous goal and a tremendous achievement, I think, on Strunk's part. Now, as I mentioned a minute ago, it was originally privately published. Eventually, it was published, with a conventional publisher, and as what is now widely known, not as The Elements of Style, but of Strunk and White. So E.B. White was an author, roughly contemporary with William Strunk. He took and revised the original The Elements of Style, and then in essence, the book was published under both of their names. Originally in 1939, I believe. Sorry, in 1959. Okay, so in 1959, E.B. White and published the revised edition of The Elements of Style. And this is the one that most people, if they're following The Elements of Style, this is what they're following, not the original book. So let me tell you a little bit about E.B. White. And if you are a devotee of children's literature, I think you may already recognize the name E.B. White. So Elwyn Brooks E.B. White was born in 1899. He was an American writer, essayist, and contributor to the New Yorker magazine. He was celebrated for his wit. And if you've read any of his books, there is an underlying wittiness to all of them. He's widely known, and known to me, certainly, as one of the greatest authors of children's books, including, okay, Charlotte's Web, Stuart Little, and The Trumpet of the Swan, all of which I have in my library, all of which I have been reading on a fairly regular basis since I was a child, although Charlotte's Web may have originally been read to me by my mother. That's how long I've been. But these, you may have seen the movies, and I think all these books, certainly Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little, have been made into movies. The movies do not compare to just how charming, how marvelous, how wonderful these books are. And of the three, actually, The Trumpet of the Swan, I think, is my favorite. And I don't want to tell you I don't want to give away the story or anything, but for anyone who has struggled because he felt he was different, The Trumpet of the Swan is well, I want to say it's the antidote, like the antidote, like all by itself, it will fix it. But as a kid, I always felt like I was a fish out of water. And when I read The Trumpet of the Swan, I realized that everybody has their things. And just because we're different than other people doesn't mean we're less than, right? Different is just different. It is not a comparative value judgment. And that is the theme of The Trumpet of the Swan. It is a marvelous book. As I'm sitting here talking to you about it, I'm thinking, I think I got to read the book again. I don't even remember how many times I've read it in my life, but it's such a wonderful book. And while these are children's books, and I of course, I never met E.B. White, but on some level, I think these were books that E.B. White wrote knowing that adults would, parents would share them with their children, and parents needed to get something out of them as much as children did. In that sense, they are like the classic Walt Disney. Walt Disney, the man, when he produced a movie, it had to be a movie that families would love, not just children. And E.B. White wrote in very much the same vein. It's really a shame that Walt Disney, when he was alive, never made any of E.B. White's books into movies, because I think that he really would have done those movies justice. Okay, so in 1957, E.B. White was invited by the publisher to revise and expand the original 1918 version of The Elements of Style by his former professor, William Strunk Jr. And White admired Strunk's concise rules for clear writing, but all he wanted to do was he aimed to sort of modernize them and broaden the guide for a wider audience of students, writers, and editors. So I'll talk to you after we talk about some of the principles of the original Elements of Style. I'll talk to you about how E.B. White changed them. Wow, that's good. Okay. Now, you may have wondered, or maybe not, why Jiggers' place is Jiggers' place, right? Shouldn't it be Jiggers apostrophe place or Jigger apostrophe S place? And the answer is No, it can't be either one of those. And here's why. Jiggers was my dog, my beloved dog, for many, many years. And his name was Jiggers, Jiggers. So it can't be, and since Jiggers' place is a place to, among other things, honor Jiggers, okay, it's his place. If it were Jigger apostrophe S place, that is not Jiggers' place, that's Jigger. That's the place of Jigger. That's not his name. If it was Jiggers apostrophe place, that says that it is the place of multiple of more than one jigger. Okay? In other words, the way we make the possessive of a plural is we take the plural and add an apostrophe afterwards. But Jiggers is singular because it's his name. So in order to make it his place, it has to be Jiggers apostrophe S place, according to the elements of style. So when I created Jiggers' place, it is first and foremost an homage to my beloved dog. But second of all, it's reminiscent, or not reminiscent. It's a, I can only think of the Hebrew word. It's an achmachta. It is a reference to the elements of style. So, here in the, as we get toward the end of the second season of Jiggers' Place, you get a little bit of insight into why it's called what it's called and why it's a little bit inelegant, Jiggers' Place, but it is grammatically correct. Okay, so that's the way you make a possessive is by adding an apostrophe S to the word. Okay. In a series of 3 or more terms with a singular conjunction, use a comma after each term except the last. So red, comma, white, and blue is correct. Now, there's what's known as the legal comma, okay, which is what I use because I was a law clerk. So if you were ever to see me write a string of words that way, you would see me write red, comma, white, comma, and blue. Okay. And in that respect, I don't follow the elements of style. Okay. Which only shows you that while I'm a rules guy, I do believe that sometimes we shouldn't follow the rules. Okay. So let's see. What's another good one? Do not break sentences into two. Okay, so you want to avoid fragments like, because I went to the store, period, and bought milk, period. No. Because I went to the store and bought milk. That would be the proper way to say that phrase. Okay, you don't need the extra word. You don't need the extra punctuation, I mean, for and. Okay, let's see. Some other ones. So use a dash to set off an abrupt break or interruption, or to announce a long appositive or summary. Okay, so I'll give you an example so you understand what Strunk means. He finally answered, dash, after 5 minutes of silence, dash, that he was not coming. Do you see that the dashes are giving a meter to the sentence that a comma just will not have? By the same token, it's all one long sentence, so you don't want to turn it into 3 sentences, because that has a different sense to it than what the writer actually means. So you can see that what Strunk was fundamentally after was being as communicative as possible. Okay, here's another one. The number of the verb agrees with the number of the subject, not the noun intervening between the two. So the bouquet of flowers smells lovely. Okay, now it's one of the weird aspects of English that when you have a single noun as the subject, the verb is in the plural, and vice versa. When you have a plural noun in the subject, the verb is in the singular. So the flowers smell lovely, a flower smells lovely. Isn't that weird? Okay, so but then what happens when you have a single subject, a single noun that's the subject, but there's an intervening noun that's a plural? Well, because that second noun is part of a prepositional phrase, the bouquet of flowers, so the verb has to agree with the subject noun, the bouquet. So the bouquet smells lovely. The bouquet of flowers smells lovely. Okay? So a prepositional phrase, which is a phrase begun by a preposition, okay, does not alter the subject, the numerical context of the subject. Okay, all right. All right. Are you thinking I'm a grammar Lahavdil Nazi? I condone it. Okay, I definitely condone it. Drank it up halfway through the show, or 2/3 of the way through the show. Okay. Omit needless words. So he is a man who is honest. That's verbose. Just say he is an honest man. It's direct, fewer words, and actually, I would argue more descriptive. Okay. All right. So those give you an idea of the elements of style, and you can see the conciseness, the omission of unnecessary words. All of those are aspects of it. And it's not in the original. It's not one of the original elements of style, but one of my big bugaboos is ending a sentence with a preposition. So people will say, what are you using that for? Okay, and that sentence ends in a preposition. Okay, now I know I sound like Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory, but it's not correct grammar to end a sentence in a preposition. The correct syntax, construction of the sentence is, for what are you using that? Now you might say to me, well, that sounds pretty snooty. Okay, yeah, it does. I would argue it sounds like someone who is educated in English. And it really depends on how a person wants to present himself. So I'm willing to risk people thinking I'm a little bit snooty by speaking and writing English correctly. So last week or the week before, someone sent me an email, or maybe copied me on an email, in which he did not end the sentence with a preposition. He in the sentence he said, for which. And I have to tell you, I was so delighted to see him using proper grammar. He was a lawyer, by the way. I didn't copy anybody else on this, but I responded to him by saying, I hope you'll forgive me for taking your time, but I really respect the fact that you used correct grammar by not ending your sentence at a preposition. And he sent me back an email a few minutes later saying, thank you, right? Probably the only two people in the world who care about such things. But it's a shame that English is subject to what I call word inflation and also devolution. So word inflation. Everything today seems to be awesome. Now, as someone who works to live a God-centered life, awesome refers to God. That's pretty much, and if it's not God or God-like, it's not awesome, because awesome means it inspires awe. And there are very few things in this world that genuinely inspire awe. Mauna Loa volcano is awesome. To see it erupt is to see the unbelievable power embodied in our planet Earth. That is truly awesome. To be in the midst of a hurricane or a tsunami and to experience the power of the ocean is awesome. To give somebody a candy bar that they like is not awesome. It's just not. It's a lovely thing to do. It's a lovely thing to do. But it's not awesome. And so this sort of what I call word inflation is a shame. The flip side is the things that are oftentimes described as evil aren't evil. They may be bad. They may be very bad. But if they're evil, what was Hitler? Super duper evil? So by moderating our language, we give ourselves a broader palette of words to use, and we can be much more descriptive, and we can better communicate with others. So that's number one. And then on the other side is the devolution of language, the idea that I can spell words however I want to spell them, and you have to figure it out. That's a shame. As recently as the early to mid 19th century, the spelling was really not standardized. Spelling only became standardized with the advent of dictionaries, and perhaps more to the point, with the writing and broad adoption of an English dictionary. And probably the first one that really did that was the OED. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, there were dictionaries that predated the OED, but they were not as thoroughly researched, as effectively compiled, and did not have the gravitas behind them to make a statement about this is how words should be spelled. Okay. With the advent of the OED, and I just have to mention, Simon Winchester, one of my favorite authors, wrote a book called The Professor and the Madman, which is about the history of the writing of the OED. It is an extraordinary book, and I mean that with no hyperbole. I've read it a number of times, and I actually got to meet Simon Winchester at a book signing now probably about 25 or 30 years ago. So by standardizing spelling, we create a situation where we can go to a book and be assured of understanding the meaning of a particular word. Once we change the spelling of that word, what we're saying is, I may have a different definition of this word than the word in its standard spelling. And that's a shame, because that's degrading the ability of people to talk to one another, and it's separating us. And I don't think we need more separation in the world. I think we need more coming together in the world. So those are not principles in the elements of style, but I think they're principles in line with the elements of style. So I mentioned that I would talk a little bit about the revisions that E.B. White made when he wrote his revised edition of the Elements of Style and created what is, as I mentioned, now known as Strunk and White. So he expanded the examples and explanations to clarify Strunk's original rules. He gave practical advice on style and usage. He gave guidance on formulating sentences that sound natural. As an author of fiction and a storyteller, E.B. White, I think, was particularly well suited for that aspect. And then he put on he also added a section on style principles. So write in a way that comes naturally, revise and rewrite. This is good advice for anybody who wants to write well. Okay. And then he added some observations on word choice and tone, encouraging writers to avoid jargon, which is, I think, so important. It's a similar issue to standardized spelling. When we use jargon is typically used to exclude people and to establish superiority. So if a doctor were to say to you, well, I've examined you, and I have to tell you, you have foreign matter in your umbilicus, would you be nervous? It kind of sounds bad, doesn't it? What the doctor has actually told you is that you have lint in your belly button. Now, if he had said to you, you have lint in your belly button, would you have been in the least concerned? Probably not, because you could just take the lint out or take a shower and it would all be taken care of. But foreign matter in your umbilicus sounds pretty serious. It's very jargony, right? And so this is why E.B. White advised against using jargon, and not that he needs me to do this, far greater writer than I would ever even aspire to be, but I heartily support E.B. White in this. And then the last thing is he advised people to write in a conversational, reader-friendly tone. And that is certainly sage advice, because in the end, if we're writing something, presumably we're doing so so as to encourage people to read what we're writing. Okay? Now, by the way, that's not always the case. If we're writing a journal purely to put our thoughts on paper, to clarify our own emotions, our own thinking, maybe just to get some of the anxiety out of our psyche, so then we don't have to worry as much about the principles that E.B. White propounded. But if we're writing to be communicative, then writing in a conversational, friendly, engaging style is superb advice. So I encourage you to get copies of the Elements of Style, not necessarily the original version. Strunk and White is definitely an improvement. I will put a link to this book in the show notes, It will, of course, be an affiliate link to Amazon, like most of my book links are. And, if you click on it, I think I get, 3 cents. But this, if you can see this edition costs $2.75. I assume it costs more now. Probably assume more like $10 or something like that. If you want to be a good writer, get Strunk and White, read it, learn the principles, and embed them in your own writing. So I thank you very much for joining me this afternoon or evening if you're on the East Coast. As I said in the beginning, this is the highlight of my every 2-week period. And I really appreciate, I see I have a couple of live viewers on. Really appreciate you joining me. If you made the cocktail, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I'd love to hear your comments, thoughts, criticisms. But mostly, I hope that Jiggers' Place is a bit of a refuge for you from the workaday world, the craziness of contemporary life. So I wish you a wonderful rest of the week, a truly restorative weekend, and signing off as I always do, really remembering you, my dear Marie. We're coming up on, unfortunately, the sad 6th anniversary of your passing in just a few days on Monday. And I know you're up in heaven. You are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.